Good evening. My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowsky Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. It's been 4 months, give or take a week, since Andrew Cuomo took control of the governor's mansion and office his father occupied for 12 years. With his first budget now adopted, Andrew Cuomo has shown he will govern, and he will govern as a fiscal conservative and social moderate, the latter consistent with the family political brand. He opposed any tax increases, including the extension of a so-called millionaire's income tax surcharge that actually applied to incomes far lower than that, and champions a property tax cap for suburban counties. At the same time, he is pressing for an ethics reform package to change Albany's secretive and dysfunctional ways, and vowed to put his full weight behind a push for marriage equality for same-sex couples. But this is Albany, where seemingly disparate issues get linked in ways that can defy credulity, including marriage equality and ethics reform. Assembly championed funding for the city university is being blocked by state senate demands that the separate and distinct state university be allowed greater control over its own affairs, including the ability to charge different tuitions at different campuses. Meanwhile, Assembly Democrats are holding the suburban property tax cap hostage to extending and perhaps sweetening rent regulation laws in the city. Any and all of these issues could move forward, or not, as part of package deals, linking them to totally unrelated issues. Tonight, we're joined by 4 New Yorkers who closely observe the political and civic process to ask the question Ed Koch always asked about himself: how are we doing? Curtis Simmons is a member of the editorial board of the Amsterdam News. Celeste Katz writes the influential daily politics blog and a weekly column for the Daily News. Mark Lieberman is a former reporter, and he's an economist and is the newest member of the CUNY TV family. And Robert George is a member of the New York Post editorial board. Mark, let me start with you. Cuomo's 4 months in, and we have a sense of it's quite different than his father's administration.
Oh, certainly. I mean, there's no question but that his achieving a balanced budget on time, the first on-time budget in years, and also he exposed things about the budget. The budget, in the past, governors have been able to say, well, we cut the budget, when all they meant was they reduced the amount of automatic increases. Cuomo accomplished an actual decrease in the state budget. Now, some of the programs that were cut may not have been, I kind of question what you said about the social compact that the Cuomo family is known for, but cuts in Medicaid are certainly not part of that social compact.
Curtis, rent regulation is probably, at least among Democrats in the city, is kind of the Maginot line. It's the line that absolutely must have, and there's kind of a lot of concern, especially among minority lawmakers, at the governor's commitment to holding on to it.
Well, the governor, we had to kind of push in the first place in terms of recognizing the need for an urban agenda in the first place. I mean, he wouldn't release it until we wrote week after week, when is he going to give us an urban agenda? So the idea that he hasn't really fixed on the rent regulation issue or any issues having to do with minority communities isn't really such a surprise for us.
In the absence of an urban agenda from a guy who used to be Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development is a little surprising.
Celeste, you and I have watched governors longer back than we care to admit, and
you longer than me.
You longer than me. Yes, ma'am, that's correct. And I go back to Governor Dewey, I think. So,
with Clinton.
You've been watching this very, very closely. How is he doing? I mean, he's got mixed reviews and positive reviews from strange places.
Sure. I mean, I think that if you look back at, say, his previous 2 predecessors, Eliot Spitzer, who was then replaced by, of course, David Patterson for reasons that we all know and maybe don't want to talk about today.
Oh, we probably do, but we're not going to.
It's a great hook.
I think that he's hook. I think that he has actually accomplished a lot just in terms of setting out an agenda in his State of the State address and trying to accomplish as much of that as he can. I mean, certainly there are things that are left undone. There are things that you said, obviously both of you mentioned, that have not really come to the fore, you know, maybe a stronger urban agenda. The issue of same-sex marriage equality has not yet been finished up, although even today he said that he was very enthusiastic about its prospects. But, you know, it's a little early to judge 4 months in, but I would say compared to, certainly to what Eliot Spitzer or David Paterson had done in this point, he's probably accomplished quite a bit.
Robert, one of the curious things, the last show we had Mike Long on the show, and he's probably the happiest guy with Andrew Cuomo's first 4 months in office than any Democrat. I mean, what does that tell you?
Well, I mean, I think
Mike Long is the chairman of the state Conservative Party.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think conservatives, or at least the Conservative Party, should be happy in that he came in saying that he wasn't going to increase taxes, was going to reduce spending, and he fulfilled that. It has to be kept in mind that he was, in a sense, directed that way based on circumstances. I mean, you've got a financial collapse. This is one of the highest taxed states in the country, and you've got a lot of people leaving the state, and so he has to figure out a way to keep them there. And help build up revenue without raising taxes, and so yeah, I think he's done a good job. Of course, again, in comparison, or I should say, in contrast to some of the chaos that came out of the last 4 years with the previous two governors, just the fact that he can walk and chew gum at the same time without being arrested is a success right there.
I don't know that we really have people leaving the state, though. I mean, the census showed the state's population rose, despite what you say is a high tax state. That's something that's always thrown out there, and people don't necessarily move on that basis.
But it's lower income individuals, younger people, immigrants, and so forth coming in, and it's higher income people that are leaving, and it's the higher income people that are the revenue generators. That's a problem.
What part of the state are you talking about? Because we certainly don't have high income people leaving New York City.
Right.
I mean, Harlem is a prime example of that, or the Lower East Side.
Well,
is another example.
Well, I mean, upstate is continuing to empty out.
That's
never
a whole
had
different issue.
and never had high income
Exactly.
people upstate. There were always
Exactly.
low income people upstate.
Yeah.
We're talking about Spitzer compared to Cuomo. I mean, Spitzer came in swearing that he was going to be he very famously said, "I'm going to be the steamroller."
That's not all he said.
It's not all he said, right? There
was an adjective in
there
front
was
of
an
it.
adjective in front of it.
Day
right?
one, everything changes.
Not in front of the kids.
Andrew Cuomo is, frankly, no less of a steamroller, just that he keeps his iron fist in a velvet glove.
Yeah, I mean, he's been known. I mean, those who do not like him or do not care for his manner of conducting himself politically, among them, interestingly, being Eliot Spitzer, have said that he's one of the nastiest people behind the scenes in politics. And I think that a lot of people, and I've written on this, and I'm sure that you guys have written on this too, a lot of people are afraid, or have been afraid for a long time, of Andrew Cuomo. I mean, he was his father's hatchet man.
Enforcer,
right, his enforcer, when he was just a very young guy, in his 20s back then when his father was running, and he maintained that reputation to this day. I think that he is keeping very much out of the national spotlight and is certainly avoiding a lot of public appearances, like, unfortunately, not going to the LCA show in Albany, which
is the reporters' show that they put
right,
on, right?
And he didn't go to the city. He didn't go to the inner circle.
He didn't come to the city show either.
He didn't even show up with President Obama when he was here, although I don't know if that will change in the future. And he was, even at a fundraiser for which he was a host for President Obama. He didn't even show up to that. But I think that people look at Andrew Cuomo with a certain awareness that he does not enjoy not getting what he wants.
Yeah, but I think a lot of that has to do with, I think he wants to be. I mean, we had had both kind of a farce and a tragedy over the last 4 years in terms of what was always known as the most dysfunctional government in the country just became a circus. So I think he wants to have this this strictly business real focus about him to show that the state can govern functionally.
Oh no, unfortunately for all his talk about ethics reform and transparency and all that stuff, I mean, still, a lot of these budget dealings were still the 3 men in a room classic construct, behind the scenes meetings, things like that.
Well, he's done that with the Assembly, and he's picked off individuals, or he's taken them out of Shelley Silver's camp by giving them jobs in his own administration.
Which every government does.
And his absence in New York City is stark. I mean, the fact that you don't, I mean, we aren't seeing him in African American communities, and we didn't see him campaigning in African American communities, and we didn't see him. We're not seeing him since he's become governor doing anything downstate. When he was releasing his budgets, it was all done upstate, and there is very, very little interaction with communities of color. This was a problem that we recognized during the campaign, and we would have pushed it harder as an issue, except for there was no alternative. Palladino was not a true alternative, for us. So we.
Well, he wasn't the true alternative, I think, across the state, and that's why the idea that he won as big as he did was because he had virtually. I mean, I don't want Palladino to take a bat to me, but he had virtually no opposition. So, I mean, he wasn't in that sense tested.
And there's an interesting point to that. I mean, it gets back to Cuomo as a Democrat, a Democratic Party loyalist. Here is a Democratic candidate for governor with a huge landslide, and the Democrats lost the New York State Senate in the same year. Cuomo was not, he was campaigning for Andrew Cuomo, not for the Democratic Party, not for Democratic members of the state Senate or Senate candidates.
Yeah, but when it was a two-seat margin, and you had a whole host of scandals for the last couple of years under Democratic control, I don't necessarily would put that.
Democratic control was for all of 2 years.
Well, no, but that's my point. And you had chaos.
And it was also a case of money. I mean, Cuomo had a lot of dollars. A lot of extra dollars, and he did not help out his fellow Democrats.
And in Elliot Spitzer's favor, that is one thing that he did right away, was to move quickly to take the state Senate back for the Democrats, and he did invest a lot of time and money in that.
And this is no different for Andrew Cuomo than for what his father did. His father did not campaign for Democratic candidates for the state Senate in all of his years in office. And he had 2 re-election campaigns that were equivalent to Andrew Cuomo versus Carl Palladino in terms of the lopsidedness.
And keep in mind too that it was also a wave election, and Cuomo, I mean, even though he didn't have any opposition, Republicans were fired up. I mean,
but he had the potential to lead the Democratic Party in the state. The governor is at the top of the ticket.
No, but I think that the wave is important because that's why you had all those Republican congressional pickups in the state, which could be more indicative,
exactly. You had six,
and that people vote for an executive on a different level than they do on a legislative level.
There was a lot of ticket splitting, and given what Cuomo was looking at in terms of the last governors, looking at the chaos in the state Senate, it made sense for him to run as himself and not run as a Democrat or run with members of the Assembly, Assembly of the Senate.
Given his opposition,
he didn't knock himself out supporting Eric Schneiderman or Tom DiNapoli.
That's
certainly.
true.
I mean, they had to drag it out of him, basically.
I want to go to some issues, but since I'm a political junkie, let me not leave this right now. His "I'm in it for me" argument that you're making.
Observation, not argument.
We assume that the man has his eye ultimately on a large White House on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. Is he? And he's almost playing a rope-a-dope in the sense that he's not taking part in the level of visibility of he's not pushing himself out there on the Sunday morning shows and on the cable shows and stuff. in order to try, because, you know, I mean, I would argue that because of his reputation as a hatchet man, that he's got to establish himself as a serious
Well, it's his first 4 months.
administrator.
It's his first 4 months. I mean, it would be inappropriate.
Well, Chris Christie
was out
is
there.
taking
Yeah,
a
but there's a
different
difference.
right
I mean,
from the beginning.
Chris Christie
he's not going.
he's been there for at least 1 year.
And Cuomo's
He
not
was out,
going
and he was
anywhere.
out right
I
from
mean,
the
he's not
beginning.
challenging Obama for renomination. So he's sitting back to wait because his chance is in 2016. There's no reason for him to put himself out there and become a target right now. Christie is kind of forced into it.
It's pretty marked, though, because if you look back at when he ran for AG, when he ran for governor in '02, he was a very different guy. And, you know,
He's much more of a slasher.
Yeah, well, you know, he was a
And
little
he's been-
more aggressive. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, and then just when he had this, you know, he had this disastrous, I mean, the guy had to pull out before the primary, and it was just this big mess of him trying to primary Carl McCall, and it looked terrible, and people were angry.
And dragged down the Liberal Party with him,
yeah,
as a
and
matter of
you know,
fact.
destroyed the ballot line. So when he came back in '06, he was a completely different guy. And then even during his career as Attorney General, I mean, think of the Attorney General he was compared to Eliot Spitzer. I mean, Eliot Spitzer was, you know, had built up a lot of headlines as AG and a lot of clips by the time he ran for governor. Cuomo was not that kind of AG.
Yeah,
at all.
I think that's a really good point. That 2002 race, I think, was a big life lesson for him, and it chastened him. So when he was running and serving as AG, he kind of kept focused with his head down, even though there was kind of chaos going on around him, and then.
Well,
and then basically waited actually for Obama to step forward and basically push Patterson aside because he didn't want to have another replay of the Carl McCall situation. So I mean,
running
I think,
against a black man.
running against another African American. Yeah, no, I think so. It makes sense that he's been there for 4 months, focusing on the issues that are in front of him, and he doesn't have to worry about the national issues. That'll come later.
I think he also is afraid that if people see too much of him, that they won't really like him. To be perfectly honest.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's happened before.
Yeah.
Right. The less seen, the better. I mean, he still hasn't done any New York 1 appearances. I mean, they're still running their clock, their famous clock on him, and he isn't really coming before the voters and citizens of downstate, because I think that he's afraid that if people hear what he has to say, or if he's really questioned on some of the policies that he's been, putting forward, that he's not going to be able to have the kind of answers that people want to hear.
I think you're right about the questioning, because that's when he made his big slip, going back to '02 again, sorry, but, you know, little time machine thing. It was on the bus, on the campaign bus, that he made that crack about George Pataki holding the leader's coat, being Rudy Giuliani during 9/11, and everyone just thought that was a spoil sport, inappropriate, Andrew Cuomo nasty thing to say. He's much more controlled now than he was then.
And the only
but he still doesn't want to
issue-
blow it.
The only issue he's really addressed in these first 4 months, and we talk about this, the only thing he's accomplished is the budget. I mean, we still have, as you said at the top of the show, Bob, we still have ethics reform, we still have rent regulations, we still have property tax cap, and redistricting. I mean, you know, these
And
are
marriage equality.
And marriage equality. I'm sorry, you're right. You know, he's talked about these issues, but he hasn't moved legislation on them. So what has he accomplished? He's accomplished a budget. No small accomplishment, to be sure.
Yeah, but if you look at that budget and you talk about the substance of that budget, I'm a father of 2 kids in public school, and I look at, I look at the fight between the mayor and the governor over who has reserve funds, who doesn't have reserve. I mean, there's a lot of technical argument. The bottom line is that my kids are going to be going to a school system that's going to have several $100,000 less in their schools. So, I mean, there's real world implications of, CUNY is facing a tuition increase. There's the fight over SUNY, and I do think that those things, are linked. So it's, while we're looking at, we look at the politics, and I was a reporter for 106 years, and we all tend to sometimes look at issues only in the context of what they mean for the next election, as opposed to how they affect
Real people.
people's lives.
Well, there's no question but that budget will affect people's lives. I mean, Bloomberg has said that this is a lot worse of a state budget than people really imagine. And he's not only complaining about the school cuts that the city is facing.
But he's talking about the Medicaid cuts.
Yeah. Oh no, but he's going to say that in the same way that Andrew Cuomo is going to say, well, you know, we got the shaft from Washington, and we'd have a much better budget if only they wouldn't cut or level fund us, you know,
So you kick
federally.
blame upstairs
at
and
the same
pain
time,
downstairs.
Cuomo cut off a revenue source that would have been $3 billion.
Which is the millionaires.
By not extending the millionaires
so-called
tax.
millionaires.
What explanation did he really give for doing that?
He had a commitment not to raise taxes. I mean, that was as firm a commitment as he had in his campaign.
Although maintaining a tax is not necessarily the same thing as raising a tax. I don't know. I think that's more than just semantics. No.
Well, when a tax is, if a tax is expiring and there's a there's a specific sunset. So I mean, if you then decide to continuing it, it does end up being
you would consider that as a raising tax.
But and how does that go to his base in terms of the Democratic Party? I mean, the people who,
or is that his base?
Holy smokes! Have you seen his the guys who are donating money? The guy raised well over $26 million. You know, I think they're going home and eating Triscuits and butter for dinner tonight. You know,
so you're saying he's not really a Democrat? Is that what you're?
No, not at all. I'm just saying he's got a lot of friends with a lot of money.
Well, and look, I mean,
who pay that tax, or
both
will no longer have to pay that.
I mean,
tax.
both parties have rich donors. I mean, that's just a fact. And again, but he's still, I think, working within the economic and budgetary parameters that he's basically kind of
Except that he made except that he made a choice, in particular on the so-called millionaires tax, which actually would apply at about what, $250,000. So it's called the millionaires tax, but that's
which actually ends up hitting, which actually does end up hitting, arguably some middle class
people, upper middle class people.
Well, still middle class.
But I mean, but that's still a choice he made. It's not as if he's just facing the that this is the hand he was played. He made a choice, and choices that elected officials make tell you something about them.
Oh no disagreement there. But again, New York State has a reputation of being a business unfriendly state, and it's also one of the highest tax states as well. And I think he wants to change that. He wants to change that reality and make it more business friendly. And if you've got more businesses coming here, that creates jobs.
There were other taxes he could have cut to break into that image. He could have done something on the sales tax, and if he wanted to lop off $3 billion of revenue, he could have kept the millionaires tax and done something with the sales tax, which arguably affects more people than that millionaires tax would have affected.
And taking care of millionaires isn't necessarily taking care of business. I mean, the average business person is not a millionaire in New York City or in New York State. So to say that you have to cut taxes for the wealthy in order to help business is not really an effective argument.
It's you can look at it from the extreme other end of the spectrum. You mentioned earlier about Medicaid spending. Obviously, Medicaid, a program which helps the poorest New Yorkers. Now, there have been cuts, and there's been a lot of discussion about that and how it's going to be very painful to a lot of people who don't make much money.
And to hospitals.
And to hospitals. But if you look at some of the figures, you guys probably saw that USA Today survey that came out. New York State spends more per person on Medicaid than almost any other state. Now, is that because our people are sicker, or because there's room to cut waste, or there's room for more efficiency in the program?
More per capita than I believe the next two states combined. Actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, Medicaid spending in New York is extremely high.
But New York is a high-cost state and everything. It's not simply that you want to spend more,
oh no,
or that
I'm not saying
waste
not because it's
but
fun.
a lot of
but
a lot of it.
It's the cost of doing business is
but a lot of it
just by the nature of New York is
and
high.
you get something back for that higher.
But then you have issues about medical malpractice reform, and insurance reform, and tort reform, and all those things that drive up the cost.
A major reason, though, is that by state law, New York makes more people eligible for Medicaid eligible for certain procedures than other states do, and that's a
social decision by the state of New York
that has economic,
it does, absolutely,
financial,
absolutely. But if we as a society, and in this case, the society in New York State, have decided that that's our public policy, we have to be prepared to pay for it.
Well, and maybe we have to be prepared to say that, you know, we shouldn't be so generous in some of these areas.
But I mean, to get it back to the guy we're talking about then, I mean, has anybody really gotten in his face and said, well, okay, what is your public policy then? Okay, you know, you talk about having this, you know, Medicaid reform, you talk about having, you know, the SAGE commission to look at efficiencies in government, but, you know, are you going to be, as we were talking about, true to the party's, you know, philosophy or
his family's philosophy, frankly.
Or at least his family's rhetoric.
But I mean,
the guy
arguably,
is
as long as we're talking about healthcare costs, he set up a commission on which he put a lot of the so-called special interests on it.
Yes.
And to talk about the guy's, either his political skills, whether it's fear, whether it's skill. I mean, I was very struck by seeing Local 1199 on this committee supporting cuts in healthcare. And one of the, you know, it was part of a deal that gave raises to home healthcare aides. But it was, you know, I mean, there was a big demo down at City Hall, of which 1199 is uniquely effective in staging in favor of this. And you know, I almost thought they were going to chant, cut our budget." I mean, it was a striking thing to see.
Well, that's one of those. It's those kind of deals that make, you know, people, you know, regardless of whether you think Cuomo has been doing a good job. When you see those kind of deals coming together, you start wondering, what's the small print? What's the small print in the deal?
And has he really changed the atmosphere in Albany?
Yeah, when local 1199, which with the previous two governors ran ads very, very critical of them when they started talking about making cuts in Medicaid. When they actually are running ads in support of a reform package, you start thinking, okay, well, if they're on board with this kind of quote reform unquote, where's the devil in the details? And
you get the business groups out there, the Committee to Save New York, which was pretty nebulous for a while until they were forced to release their records. I mean, business and real estate interests going nuts supporting a Democratic governor is pretty interesting.
But isn't that also partly an indication of the man's meaning the governor's political skills?
Or maybe willingness to sell his soul.
I mean, he's
not selling out, he's buying in.
He wants what he wants. I mean, it sounds that sounds, you know, like a simpleton talking, which I very well could be, but I mean, I think he knows what he wants. He wants to make the people, he wants to be popular among the people. He wants to have a good public impression. He wants to get reelected. He wants to move on. He's going to do what he has to do.
I don't know. He also is capturing the fact that he has a 4-year term. He has to get it done in the first year. The same way, I mean, you look at the national administration, you know how the political calendar takes over. Right. President Obama knew that he had 1 year to get heavy-duty legislation passed.
And the other governors, who some of the Republican governors across the country who are taking some unpopular stands, they have the same sentiment. You know, get it done in the first.
Usually, you want to get the unpopular stuff done in the first year.
But speaking to his political acumen, I think something that he did that Spitzer was, you know, off talking to reporters saying, you know, I'm a blanking steamroller and things like that. Cuomo, to his credit, has been getting out there and took basically the language of his inauguration speech and his state of the state address, and then went around the state and basically sold it. And the polls suggest that was an effective
except for in New York City.
Well, there is
he didn't sell anything in New York City.
There's a long history of conflict and tension between you know, Governor X and New York City Mayor Y, and so it may very well he thought that it was better for him to focus his attention in the suburbs, upstate, and so forth, in terms of building up support rather than.
He probably figured it would be a harder sell there than it would be in, you know, in the 5 boroughs.
And New York is New York City issues, such as rent regulations, that really doesn't affect any place else in the state, and that's a heavy. Okay, you're right. I apologize. That's going to be a heavy. That's going to be a heavy lift.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
But yet it's part of
the property tax.
But yet it's linked into the property tax cap. in which some of the suburban districts whose schools actually depend, the quality of those schools depend on an increasing property tax to fund those schools. Some of those people may find that the kind of level of education that, frankly, those of us who send our kids to the New York City public schools find unimaginably luxurious, they're going to be losing. There is a cost.
The interesting
in the actual service provided by through that cap that's going to come and bite somebody.
Traditionally, those issues have split in terms of city versus suburban and upstate. City, as you said, it's more the rent regulations issue. Suburbs and upstate, it's property tax. However, it was just this week where the New York City assessor changed the formula for New York City assessment, and there are a lot of homeowners,
co-op and
condo who are getting slapped with increases that could be as high as as 150%. I mean, the assessor just capped it at 50. So I wouldn't be surprised if this property tax question starts to starts getting a little bit more traction within the 5 boroughs as well.
Let me take a question. Tell us your name and tell us the campus you're from.
I'm Lara Porter from Queens College. My question was more related to the beginning of the talk, but when you guys were discussing Spitzer and also the nastiness of Cuomo, I was wondering how much that personal character matters in politics when it comes to policy, and what role that really plays.
Very, very, very good question.
Well,
the relationship between the personal and getting things done in terms of policy.
The Governor Cuomo has been picking off legislators one by one by giving them wine and crackers and cheese at the executive mansion, taking a page out of Nelson Rockefeller's book. Nelson Rockefeller used to entertain legislators all the time. He was doing it on his dime, not necessarily on the state's dime, but it was a very successful technique of winning the friendship. A lot of politics, you do see these odd couple situations where conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats jointly sponsor legislation, whether it be on a state level or on a federal level. And that comes from personal relationships.
And also because of cutting deals.
Well,
it's really about deal cutting.
Deal cutting, excuse me, but deal cutting towards an end.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, each party has its interests. I mean, like we were talking in terms of the property cap issue for suburban folks and rent control issues. If you can get the two sides to come together to say, if you give on this side, we'll give on that side, then you can have some kind of deal that comes out of that.
And traditionally in New York, the Republicans have held on to the Senate with the exception of a 2-year, the brief 2 years.
A very eventful 2 years.
Yeah, but the Republicans have held on to the Senate. The Democrats have held on to the Assembly. So the governor has to figure out, usually whoever the governor is, has to figure out what issue do I need to get the Assembly to give on over here versus what issue do I need to get the Senate to give on over here. So in this case, it happens to be it's going to be the property tax and the rent regulation that is going to be in the mixture. But to the lady's point. Not too many people realize this, but the prostitution stuff aside, Spitzer's administration was basically already dead in the water a year and a half in, because nobody, either in his own party or in the other party, liked him, because they felt that he was emotionally shaky. He would explode at whatever time, and people didn't think that they could trust him. There are a lot of people who may kind of fear Cuomo and not quite sure what he's, but at least he is acting in a kind of a traditional political way, working with individuals of his party and the other, and trying to seduce them in a proper
You just don't expect the same kind of, you'd walk around the Capitol and be like, gee, one day there will be a fist fight between Joe Bruno and Elliot Spitzer. I wonder who's going to win.
Well, Bruno may be 78, but he was a boxer.
He was a military boxer.
I would have taken Bruno.
So I don't see.
I think that the Spitzer lesson is that when a bully gets knocked down, there's nobody there to pick him up.
Yeah, that's exactly.
That's really what. what?
And he lost that almost on day one. Frankly, he lost.
Just Rockefeller, Mickey Carroll, who was a reporter for many years, now is the spokesman for the Quinnipiac poll that we all worked with. We worked with also. Has a wonderful story about Rockefeller. This is in 1964, where he or somewhere around there, where he was holding a press conference, and he said, "Take the average guy making $100,000."
Yeah, that's right.
Which was, he was a Rockefeller, and probably the standing income was like $12,000. Was Rockefeller single? That's a very complicated question.
The guy makes $100,000.
He was married, but he acted like he was single. That's exactly right.
That's a very complicated question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Elaine. I'm from John Jay College, and my question is, how does the governor going to make deals with the interest group for Medicaid, and who will be the winner and the loser when it's reformed?
Well, who are the winners and losers? I mean, when the questions about Medicaid, and the governor seems to have, the Medicaid reform stuff is not really done yet.
The deal he created is almost is the way they're selling the way they're selling the reform is it's almost an Oprah Winfrey bill. Everybody wins. Everybody wins. In that you've got.
But everybody can't win.
Well, the thing is, but
I'm not going to look under my seat.
As we were saying before, once you manage to co-opt the unions and the hospitals and other special interests and saying and get them to buy into the fact that they can create a deal in which everybody benefits. That's the holy grail of politics. Whether it actually works out that way, still remains to be seen. And there's still going to be an actual vote.
It's whether everybody feels that they
feels
won.
right.
They
What's
walk
really
out of the room
happen-
thinking they've won.
Everybody's going to get. Can I say that? I can't say that on television.
Yes, you can.
The yes word?
Yes.
Okay.
I was hoping that was what you were going to
Yes.
say. But
I think everybody, in some way or another, if they do it right,
we're print
will probably end up getting somewhat screwed, which will probably be the fairest thing for everybody.
And I think that there's, and unfortunately for a lot of the legislators, I think that they felt like there was really no choice, that the budget hole was so large, and you really had no choice but in this particular budget, in this particular year, but to play with Cuomo. Are they happy about it? I've talked to a number of legislators who are not. And will his second budget, will he have as easy a time with
second budget, right, during an election year also.
Right. It's not as...
Well, it's also, this one came off of a honeymoon. I mean, I was thinking the same thing as you were saying that he came in with a lot of political capital,
right,
and supposedly a mandate.
But he was very smart with this budget. There's a section of the budget, arguably the most contentious part of it, involving both education and healthcare spending, where they built into the budget a 2-year spending window and not a 1-year. So you're not going to be having a fight over on the education and health issues in next year's budget as you in the middle of an election year, which is I think a very canny way of doing the budget process.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Kevin McGanna, and I'm from LaGuardia Community College. Just want to ask, in terms of Governor Cuomo, when he was running Andrew Cuomo, compromising on the fundamental democratic principles of taxing the rich, is it possible and is it feasible to have the campaign switch from private to public funding, and what are the benefits and consequences of having public funded campaigns?
As we have for city offices.
And that's been, for the most part, a success. I mean, you do have candidates who opt out of it, and the Campaign Finance Board in the city has been getting more and more responsibility and authority. But
you've got a lot of people that kind of got a whole lot of people that game the system as well by putting on family members just so they can get 4-to-1 matching funds and things like that. I don't like the idea of public funding at the city level, and I don't think it's a good. I don't think.
But don't you think it's been a tremendous success in terms of providing access to people who might not otherwise be able to run? I actually think
certainly in terms of minorities,
to participate.
Certainly in terms of minorities.
Right.
I mean, where there isn't the dollars. I mean, in terms of a lot of individuals, I mean, if there wasn't public financing of elections, and even if you were talking about the campaign of Bill Thompson, you know, where if he didn't have matching funds, I mean, even in that situation where Bloomberg was able to kind of close down a lot of avenues of money that should have been available to Bill Thompson, Democratic money that should have been available, the fact that there was matching funds was the reason why Bill Thompson was able to raise $10 million.
Well,
And,
you know, I mean,
come as close as he did.
Yeah, but
I think that's a kind of a special. It's a special case when you've got a billionaire mayor running. I mean, I think.
Well, more and more we see millionaires coming into races and using their own funds. It's not an anomaly anymore.
But yeah, but I don't think you need.
I
I don't think you necessarily need matching funds in every.
And what do you do in those circumstances when a millionaire or a billionaire decides to put their money in? If you don't, in fact, have matching funds. What then is the old? What
Yeah,
then
but you
is?
can't
What then
prohibit
is?
people from opting out. In case
No.
you haven't noticed.
No, that's not what I'm
The
saying.
guys who
That's
opt
not
out-
what he's
That's
saying.
not what I'm
Right.
saying.
I'm just saying the guys
That's
who
the
opt out
advantage.
often win.
But that's the advantage of having
Right,
matching
to promote
funds.
competition, so there can be some
so
competition,
that you can
and everything's
compete.
not just a washout.
And
Absolutely.
in fact, given how the public financing system at the federal level is basically falling apart, partly because of
Well, that's
But
only,
it's only
the
it's only for
presidential
the
level.
president.
But
I mean,
partly because of the success of President Obama's 2008 campaign. Yeah, I think you know.
And that's an
I think it's a good
anomaly
idea.
more than anything else.
You know,
For a
no, I don't
Democrat
think
to be
you'll-
I don't think
in
that's
terms
an-
of
I
well,
don't
in
think you'll
terms
see
of a
publicly
Democrat.
funded- I don't
In
think
terms
you'll
of a
see publicly
Democrat
funded
being.
president
You're not gonna.
We'll see.
I don't think
Beyond after we see the
I don't
after we
see
see the Obama years and we see what happens, will the next Democrat after Obama be able to be as effective a fundraiser as he has?
You never go back
I think
in politics.
I gotta
Once
agree.
Once the
with
The
example,
mold is broken.
Once the example,
This is it.
President Obama is probably going to raise somewhere in the neighborhood of $750 to $1 billion in his reelect. When other candidates of either party see what the possibilities are there, it would be foolish. It would be foolish of them to go back into the old system with it.
Yeah,
when
but
they're
you
limited.
also know that, I mean, it would be foolish to only look at what the candidate raises and not look at the impact of the Citizens United case and the fact that there's people outside the candidates
but that proves
spending
even
a
more.
lot more money than the candidates themselves.
And that proves
not
even
every
more why you
candidate can raise that kind of
wouldn't.
money.
But the parties
I
can
know.
raise money.
That's
issue
a different.
tax.
That's
think
a
about it
different
more on a
issue. That's
legislative
different-
level
But soft
than
money
at the
plays a big
executive.
part. Issue ads, soft money.
You know, legislators spend an inordinate amount of time fundraising, and probably more time fundraising than they do legislating or doing constituent service.
Maybe it's more fun going to parties.
Oh,
than
so
Yeah, I
voting on
guess it
bills.
is.
So we've got public funding in New York City, and the city council is doing so much important work because they don't have to raise money. I don't think so.
Well, the
No offense to the
limitations of the
city
city council are
That-
limitations within the
that-
charter
exactly.
rather than
It has nothing to do with
the nature of funding.
Yeah.
Well, but I know.
I mean,
but
the
speaking
same
to your
thing,
point, though, I mean,
you know,
I don't
the
think
state
I don't think it has-
legislature is spending a lot of time, and the reelect rate of members of the state legislature is incredible. Was it more people have been thrown out of the legislature by indictment than by losing elections?
Death, indictment, or becoming a judge.
Right.
Those are the three ways you leave.
Albany,
As
Albany, a place of many indictments and few convictions.
Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is John Moreno, Queens College. My question is regarding Governor Cuomo's redistricting proposition.
Excellent.
Great.
It was clearly putting him in a position of power, which brings controversy because it's a violation of separation of power. Why do you think he would put himself or his staff would put him in this position, which could bring a lot of controversy, and instead of keeping him in the shadow, put him in the headlines?
I'm not sure I understand your question. That why is the governor sticking his nose in how the legislature redraws the lines? Is that?
Well, he has to
yes.
sign the
He
bill. He
created
has to
the
sign the
panel
bill.
as opposed to.
Being
Well,
done
is there?
with
Are
the
you
opposed to
are you
the
crossing the executive and the legislative
Right,
lines?
as
Well,
opposed to the legislator designing the bill and then him signing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost a quibble in a certain way because on a whole host of issues.
Well, it's basic civics. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It's,
Well, no.
it's more than equivalent.
Well, no. What I meant was, I mean, the redistricting, looking at it as any other issue that the legislature would put together. The governor often is consulting with what's
Well, I think you have his argument, and it's an argument that Ed Koch has made most forcefully, and that people who are good government and even if not good government, better government, are saying that the legislature can't be trusted to draw its own lines and draw it fairly.
And what the governor
I happen to think that, and this goes to another question I want to ask, that if you have fair redistricting in this state, you will never have a Republican-controlled state Senate. Because if you got the same 18 million people and you can divide them up so that you have a 60-seat Democratic majority in the Assembly and a 2-seat Republican majority in the state
Republicans
Senate,
get back into control.
and then all of a sudden you have, I mean, this tells you
demographics don't work in their
that
favor.
the demographics cannot work under fair redistricting, and which raises the question: does Cuomo really want a Democratic state Senate, which is a different political question? But I think that to break each chamber's control of its own lines is really it will have profound changes on who is going to be controlling both houses of that legislature.
The governor said during the
you can't draw
campaign-
lines that are going to hurt the Democrat control of the Assembly. You can't not draw lines fairly that are not going to hurt the
The
Republican.
governor said during the campaign that he would veto any redistricting solution or proposal that did not call for an independent commission. He's repeated it a couple of times since he took office. It's a platform, if you will, of Ed Koch, of Citizens Union, and other good government groups.
New York Uprising.
Well, that's Koch's group. And those groups are going to hold him to it. Silver is being dragged into it, and Dean Skelos, the leader of the Senate rather, is kind of backing away from that.
Well, Shelley Silver is, as usual, the best poker player. He's saying, "I'm with you, Governor." I mean, because it costs him nothing to do it. I mean,
Exactly.
I think Shelley is as
Exactly,
usual, waiting everybody out.
But you said you raised the important question of does Andrew Cuomo want a Democratic-controlled state Senate? Certainly, his father never wanted one, which goes back to one.
And he doesn't want one also.
Why?
Well, I think it partly comes down to race. When you look at the way that the numbers work themselves out in terms of so many of the Democrats happen to be either African American or Latino, and when you put the caucus together and the way that it actually winds up working out, there winds up being a significant concentration of African American and Latino power in the Senate, okay, in a way that African Americans and Latinos do not have in the Assembly. So you wind up having a situation where you really have true empowerment, minority empowerment, if you in fact have a Democratic controlled Senate, because there are no Republican senators who are of color. There are zero.
Zero.
Okay, so
that's not an exaggeration.
So, no, there
zero,
are literally zero, and there have been zero for decades. And so, so this is a way of over-empowering white folks.
Except for Olga Mendez, who switched.
Okay, well,
And
it's
Pedro
a way
Espada,
of,
who switched.
Pedro Espada, who switched a couple of times.
but it's a way of over-empowering by having a political body that is completely non-representative, having so much political clout. It's a way of over-empowering white folks in our state and underrepresenting in terms of political clout people of color, and that's what Andrew Cuomo is doing.
You're saying Andrew Cuomo doesn't want African Americans to have
not to have a power base,
a
minority power base.
Even one that acts in accordance with his policies.
He certainly didn't fund it.
No, but I mean,
he certainly didn't. When the one that Mr. George was complaining about. Okay, the last Democratic, the 2-year one, okay, had minority leadership in it. okay?
Minority leadership of the majority.
Of the majority,
Right.
and he did not fund that.
Which
okay?
leadership
he did not fund it.
Leadership which
they looked for him
to
fund it.
Leadership
and he
which
didn't
stabbed
give it to
itself,
him.
minority leadership which stabbed itself in the back too.
Who are you talking about? Are you talking about those two individuals who were out?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
that happens, but they were co-opted, as we know as well, by the Republicans.
But no,
I'm
but
not-
no,
I'm not
no,
sure
wait,
they
wait,
were
wait, wait. I
co-opted.
think it's unfair just to say that
They were co-opted.
that Espada and
Montserrat were co-opted?
Are quote co-opted.
They were co-opted.
Pedro Espada is a very smart and cunning individual. If he was quote
Who's
co-opted,
likely to be indicted.
well, he already is indicted.
Okay, he is indicted. Okay.
But my point is, though, why say, oh, he's co-opted by the Republicans, rather than say he wanted to cut his own deal, and you want to say that that the white boogeyman of the Republicans are somehow using mind control on him. He was doing it for his own self.
What
his
have
own
the
self-interest.
Republicans done to recruit minority members into the Senate?
I know, but that's not my point.
That's the question. Nothing. So if the Republicans were interested in having a more diversified party, having more diversified representation, they would put people up in a real way and put some money behind it. They haven't been interested in that.
Good. This is very, very interesting. I do want to get in. We have time for a couple of more questions.
My name is Therese, and I'm from LaGuardia Community College. So my question is, instead of cutting funds to Medicare, public school, and CUNY, I would like to know what is it going to take for Governor Cuomo to impose federal taxes on corporations offshore whose headquarters are based in the city?
Well, I mean, obviously the governor has limited authority and power of how he can affect what's going on in Congress in terms of corporations moving offshore. There is an issue. There is something called the unitary tax, in which you can tax corporations based on the percentage of business they do in your state compared to their worldwide business that they do. Though no state, I mean, various states have tried that and gotten basically shot down.
I think there was one member that tried to, or may have even put forward a bill that would affect both corporations and individuals who live part of the time in New York in terms of trying to get a larger amount of their income. It's not something I would see Cuomo doing in his first 2 years, or even in his. What
about President Cuomo?
There was some discussion about if Cliff Lee had signed with the Yankees, what it would have cost him
in terms of taxes,
in terms of personal income.
Yeah, so well, if you're a Yankee fan, we're not going to ask that question. I happen to be a Mets fan, but go ahead.
You have my sympathy.
Hi, my name is Abbas. I'm from Brew College. I am a Yankees fan.
Next. I'm sorry.
But my question is regarding, earlier you were discussing some of the reasons that you speculate is why Governor Cuomo is staying out of the public's eye. And you did mention one possible reason is that if they see me, they won't like me. I'm putting that in quotes. And what I want to know is, how do you think that could backfire in the case of Governor Cuomo? I mean, it's only been a few months, but how long do you think this strategy can work, and what are the drawbacks that you predict?
Interesting question.
I think if he's running for president down the road, that certainly is going to be a drawback, because the people of New York State really don't know him. How is he going to and he hasn't found the mechanisms to engage the people of New York State.
Well, first of all, we have to look.
So how do you then go to the national level if you haven't figured out how to engage the people of your own state in a real committed way?
I really do think that he's trying to, get settled in as governor. It hasn't been very long. He doesn't want to.
I think he's also trying to make his reputation.
I think we're getting way ahead. I think we're getting way ahead of it.
Yeah,
we have to worry.
Well, we've heard talk about him being on the vice presidential ticket next go round.
He's not. If there's any date that he's focusing on, it's 2014. It's not 2000. It's not 2000. It's not 2012.
When he's up for re-election.
When he's up for re-election,
right.
I imagine after come this summer, he'll start going around the state and
New York City.
Well, I think this is where
you just want him to come around the state more.
I don't know if it backfires necessarily with the general public that may or may not see him speaking at a concert or at a a fundraiser or something. Where it backfires, I think, is with the media, because I know a lot of people including myself, who covered that campaign, were very frustrated about not getting a lot of one-on-one time with him. I mean, how many people got real sit-downs? How many people got to go on the road? I mean, you know, Elliot Spitzer, we all piled into the campaign bus and drove to like Utica. It was beautiful. And, you know, all this stuff. And then we drove back to Long Island. And I mean, we had a lot of FaceTime with the candidate. And
got to know him.
Yeah, and in Cuomo's case, that wasn't really, and people say, well, you know, he's been around forever, you guys have always known him, but we didn't get to spend that. You know, there was a lot of frustration on the part of the media. And I think in that way, you know, for better or for worse, some of that can filter through to how his administration gets covered.
Even though the media is objective.
I spend more time on Utica Avenue than I do in Utica. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Lee. I'm from LaGuardia Community College. Earlier in our discussion, we've talked about cuts in Medicaid, education, discretionary funding, not extending millionaires' tax. What would have been the best or the better alternative in balancing budget?
Well, there you go. I mean, these are reports.
Budgets,
I mean, go ahead.
Budgets are two-sided documents.
Right.
There are revenues and there are expenses.
Right.
And he chose to take the biggest bite out of expenses without dealing with
and chose not to increase revenues. But as I said before, I mean, if he wanted to cut tax revenues by $3 billion, as he did by not extending the millionaire's tax, there are other taxes he could have chosen that probably would have had a greater benefit for more people.
Well, one thing he did do, and I think you mentioned this in the opening remarks, it's not just a matter of reducing spending. He attacked the spending formula that's in the budget that creates arguably artificial spending increases. So he was able to shrink what the supposed deficit was, which I think which was like an 8% or 10% deficit or whatever, by basically saying that these automatic increases that are expected will not go through. I mean, it's partly a budget trick, but it's a budget trick that had serious implications, and that in a sense kind of kept the level of spending cuts down somewhat.
And was that undone by doing a 2-year budget for education and for health?
Except the 2-year budget doesn't mean that you can't revisit it. I mean, it makes it more difficult to reopen that budget next year, but you can revisit it.
And one thing to watch for the governments often do is when especially when leaders are saying we don't want to raise taxes, they'll put in user fees, sin taxes, things that are not officially taxes, but things that are revenue generators.
Except that he, in fact, has resisted a lot of those.
Well, we have to look to see also what's going to happen with Native American reservations, cigarette taxes. That could be a very big deal.
The sugar tax is not going to go through.
Nope.
I've got the 30 seconds. So, do you think he wants a Democratic state senate or not?
I don't think so.
Do you think he wants a Democratic state senate?
I think he likes the status quo.
And what do you think?
I don't think Democratic governors like Democratic state senates.
And you know my answer.
I want to thank everybody. I think thank you for being with us on the CUNY Forum, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.